living in Seattle with Michael was a challenge because, again, Michael didn't really want to do anything more than just get high all the time. And all of a sudden I'm realizing I want to do shit. In fact, I got this really weird job at this place called Selective Social Club, which was the precursor to computer dating. It was like if you signed up to get matched up. We matched people up. This was in like the early 70s. Like I was like 21 then, so it's like 74. And you could get matched up with other people. And this is the way it worked. I was really good at sales. Is women got in for free. It's very sexist. Women got in for free, and men had to pay anywhere from $100 for a trial membership to $500 for a lifetime membership, and you gave us what you liked and what you wanted, and we would match you up according to your desires. The reality is if you said 18 to 35, you ended up getting every one of our 18 to 35 girls. It was stupid. That said, though, I was really good at what I did, and actually met some really cool guys that way. I met one guy that spoke 13 languages, and I tell you what, sex when the guys speak in Russian and then Yiddish wasn't as much fun, but some of his languages were really cool. He spoke a lot of languages. So I was working for them, and I realized that I wanted to do more with my life than just be a hippie. And so Mike and I split up. And that's when I started getting into the food industry. And I'd already had a gig in San Diego working as a cook, and I'd been a cocktail waitress at the Enlisted Men's Club on Coronado Island, so I already had a little bit. So I started bartending at the Sloop Tavern in Ballard. You guys all remember this. Some of you may have been to the Sloop Tavern. I was Big Wayne, 6'8". That guy was huge. And I was a bartender at the Sloop Tavern, and that's where I met Gary, my second husband. What a disaster. Oh my God. That was a mistake. He was my 10-month marriage. We were together for about a year. We broke up, and then we got back together, and it was a 10-month marriage. That said, though, I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then after Gary and I split up, I continued in the restaurant business, and I became a manager, and I managed restaurants, and I all total over 27 years in the restaurant business. It was really an amazing experience. So I was managing restaurants, and I was managing a restaurant in Auburn, and this guy walks in. His name is Fred, and he ended up becoming my 8-year marriage. Fred was hot. This is when I discovered new relationship energy. How many of you have had new relationship energy? Oh, I hate it with a passion. We would sit there and eat, and then we'd forget to eat, and we'd just stare at each other. It was so stupid. So 3 months after we got together, his son comes to live with him. And all of a sudden, I'm the mother of an 8-year-old child. And that transformed my life, too. I got to be a mom. A real mom, because I tried to get pregnant with Michael. I did mention that, and it didn't work. And I kind of figured that I couldn't get pregnant again. And so I ended up with this 8-year-old child, and I got to be a mom. And I was married to a man who I love dearly, but again, I pick him, man. Oh, God, how I pick him. He didn't have any inclination to ever make anything of himself. And I supported us. Well, he tried to start a business. And if it wasn't for the kid, we would have probably divorced earlier. But I got to be a mom for 7 years. And I got to spend an amazing time experiencing that. I also went to my very first swing club, which was at this place called the Longhouse out in bumfucked Egypt, Redmond. And Fred and I decided, so a little bit about me, and this is one thing I haven't talked about, is that I'm polyamorous, for those of you who don't know. I have multiple partners, but I've been poly-ish all my life. We called it free love when I was with Michael. Mike and I had a girlfriend that lived with us for a while, Sandy. She was, we were in a V. They weren't lovers. And she and I were lovers until the day that oh God, should I tell everybody? Yeah. She and I were lovers until the day I found my German Shepherd licking between her legs, and I just decided I couldn't go there anymore. That said, so I was one of these people being raised a fundamentalist Christian, being raised with the paradigm of monogamy that I would try monogamy. Every time I would have a relationship, I'd try to be monogamous. But then I would fall in love with somebody else, or I'd be like, oh my God, look at chicken, that's really cute. And I just couldn't, focus. And I don't believe in cheating, and I've never cheated on a partner, so I would either end a relationship or open it up. So every one of my marriages, we tried to open them up. Yeah, it was kind of weird with Sandy and Mike and I living together. Gary and I did less about opening our relationships, but he fell in love with my best friend, and when he and I split up, I sent him to her because I knew he loved her, and he never acted on it. They never acted on it, but I knew he loved Meryl. So when Gary and I split up, I sent him to Meryl. I said, Gary, I broke up with him over the phone. I had. So some of you are going to laugh at this, but I did the EST training in the early 70s. I also did Landmark later. And EST really changed my life, because one of the things it did is it made me realize some stuff about myself. I finished my conversations with my dead father. My father had died right after Gary and I got married in a car wreck. Him and my brother Chris were killed in a car wreck. And that didn't really help Gary's and my marriage either, to be honest, having deaths in the family. But EST helped me finish with my dad, and it made me realize that I didn't want to be married to this guy named Gary anymore. So I call up Gary on the phone. I was bad, and I said, we were getting ready to move. That apartment we're moving into, I'm going to move into it. You move in with Meryl. And he goes, what? I said, go move in with Meryl. I know you love her. So he did. And they produced one of the most amazing children in the world, my goddaughter, Ty, who is like fucking amazing. So that's Gary. And then Fred, I got my stepson. Ooh, that was great. But Fred and I, we just weren't meant for each other either. And so I split up, and I'm single again. And I meet this guy named Jake. And Jake is a kinky motherfucker. Jake liked to do things, and this is the first time I really started exploring kink, was Jake. Oh, God. And he was a switch, and so the things that he liked me to do to him, I think in hindsight, I could have killed him. I mean, we did really, really dangerous stuff, because I didn't know there was a community of people out there. I just knew that we liked doing things like choking, and he really liked to be choked. And, oh, God. And I used to use the telephone cord. But anyhow, we did survive it. And in the survival, we decided to open up a restaurant, because I was in this restaurant business, You guys are laughing about the telephone cord? Jeez. I didn't kill him. Damn. Our very first really real date, I dressed in this really fancy nightgown. My bed was on the floor, and I was living with my friend Meryl, and because by then she and Gary had split up, and her 2 kids, and my bed was on the floor, and I took and put eye bolts on the bedroom and put a rope, because I knew he was kinky, because we had talked about it, but I really didn't. We'd never done anything, so I put rope, and I'm like, I don't have any toys, so I went to the kitchen and I got a cucumber and a banana and a spatula and then I answered the door, and I'm like, hello, master. And he's like, oh. And then he got into roll really fast, and we were doing this whole DS weird roll thing where I was feeding him with chopsticks, and feeding him. I made a fancy dinner. We didn't have a fireplace, but I opened up the wood-burning stove so it looked like a fireplace. And Meryl took the kids and left, so of course, for the day. And every once in a while, he would come out of it and go, oh, shit. And then he would get back into roll and go, yes, go do this. And I'd be like, yes, master. And anyhow, that was our first real date. And so needless to say, we had a kinky relationship. So we started a restaurant because we both, I was really in the restaurant business. He was not in the restaurant business. But I knew a lot about it. I had all these years as a manager. So we decided to open up a restaurant in Auburn and we called it Back Alley Jake's. And so we had some adventures in doing that. That's where I hired my lovers, one of my female lovers, because Jake and I were not monogamous in the least bit. I hired my female lover's son, and then I ended up having a relationship with him. And then Jake's like, are you going to fuck all of her family? And I said, well, her husband is kind of cute too, but I didn't. But so we had the cafe in Auburn for a while, and sadly, our relationship started to get kind of wonky. And, and this was weird. This was in 1989, and this is during the height of the AIDS crisis. And guess what you have to do what you had to do in order to get insurance for a business, you had to take an AIDS test. And I'm like, fine, even though I was having unprotected anal sex with Jake, and I was having unprotected sex with an IV drug user, but I'm like stupid. I'm like, I'm fine. And Jake turns white when we find this out. And I'm like, what's wrong? Why are you turning white, Jake? And he goes, I never told you this. And remember, we're open. He could have told me. But I've been fucking guys at Fort Dent in the bathroom there for the last 5 years, unprotected, because, none of us did use protection back then, hardly at all. That was the longest 3 weeks wait for because it took 3 weeks back then to find out if you were positive. And luckily we were both fine. But it put a cramp in our relationship, partly because he lied to me. I'm one of these people that if you have agreements with me, don't lie to me. My agreement with you is to be honest. Your agreement with me is to be honest. So we continued to run a business, but we didn't have a relationship. However, earlier that year, we had answered an ad in a swingers magazine for kinky people. Because you guys realize this is before the internet did all this stuff. This was so you know how you found people? You found them in swingers magazines. And they had all kinds of codes, like doing English meant like spanking and stuff and things. So we answered several ads in these swingers magazine because we were looking for other kinky people to play with. And we actually met a few people, but nothing quite worked. So I get this phone call, because then you either got it was either the phone or a letter from a guy named Allena Gabosch. And he's like, my girlfriend and I are looking for another couple to play with. And I'm like, oh shoot, Jake and I aren't together anymore. And he's like, really? Oh, that's really too bad. We were hoping to get together. And we chatted a bit on the phone, and he found out that my restaurant was in Auburn. And he goes, oh, I work for Boyne, and I work in Auburn. Can I just come by and meet you? And I'm like, oh, please, because this is a kinky person. I wanted to find out more about it. And that's when I met the man that I eventually married, Allena Gabosch, who to this day, even though we're no longer married, I love passionately. In fact, I love all the people I would marry too. But Steve is the guy who brought me to the community. Him and his girlfriend had been doing a thing called Kinky Couples at New Horizons, which was a swing club up north here. And they've been running kinky couples parties. He was involved with the National Leather Association. This man was polyamorous. And I'm like, what's that? And that's openly non-monogamous and about love. And I'm like, oh, what a concept. I've been doing this all my life, and I didn't know there was even a word for it. Steve was my godsend. And he and his girlfriend broke up had nothing to do with me, and we hooked up. Shortly after that, my restaurant closed, and I moved in with Steve, and that was the beginning of the sex-positive journey that changed my life totally. We started putting on kinky couples parties. How many here have been to kinky couples parties? Anybody here? Oh, a couple of you. These were, we were creating sex-positive culture, and we didn't know we were creating sex-positive culture. We just were having parties and having fun. But we had an area that was kind of an any-which-way area where everybody could play. We had a male-identified only, we had a female-identified only, and we had a nursery for people that did age play. These things were unheard of, but the biggest unheard of thing, back in the early 90s, BDSM was not connected to sexual intercourse or any kind of sexual activity. Many clubs around the country, there were a few BDSM clubs around the country, did not allow sex. And if it did allow it, it wasn't any PV sex. It was, you can stick a dildo in there, but you can't stick a penis in there. That was the attitude back then. Partly because of the AIDS crisis, partly because sexual shame. Because that's really where it all boiled down to. We did something unheard of. We allowed sex at our parties. Now, we did make a requirement that if you were having public sex, we asked that you practice safer sex, because we wanted to encourage people to use safer sex. We wanted that education. But what you did privately, we didn't care. And and Steve and since Steve, I have never had unprotected penis-vagina sex, because Steve was a huge proponent of safer sex, and he taught me a lot about it. In fact, he so eroticized it that when the female condom came out, he couldn't get an erection because it wasn't a condom on his penis. It was pretty funny. Don't tell Steve I said that. So Steve and I were together for quite a long time. In the process of being together, I ended up opening up Beyond the Edge Cafe, which was my cafe. Yay. Now, some of you have been to that one, yeah. When we first opened, we did not think we were going to have a dungeon in the basement. My friend Denise and I just thought we were going to have a little cafe. We were right next to Edge of the Circle Books, and Robert was awesome, and we just going to have a little cafe and serve sandwiches and soups and salads. And then, what was the name of the place that closed? Here's my aphasia happening. There was a club where we had dungeon in the back room. It was down in Pioneer Square. What? Yes, that place. Oh my God, it was like so cool. But then they lost their the catwalk. They lost their license because there was BDSM there, and there is a law on the books that says no flagellation. No flagellation in a place that sells alcohol in the state of Washington. So just so you know, anytime you get flogged in a bar, like at our place or at some bar, you are breaking the law. So they lost their liquor license for like a week or so, a couple of weeks, and Denise and I are like, well, we have a 400 square foot room, basement. We'd been using it for some educational stuff, but let's throw a party. So we threw a kinky party in a 400 square foot room that's smaller than this room. And people started showing up. And so Robert let us move into his side, and all of a sudden we had 1,000 square foot, and every Saturday night we threw a BDSM party, a kinky party, where people would come and spank each other and stuff. Now, we didn't let people get completely naked because this was a restaurant, and we didn't want to get shut down for that. And we didn't serve alcohol though, so people could play and stuff. And then I would do some private close the door parties and stuff where things got a little bit sexier. In fact, one time the fire department came to check us out. Because the fire department has to come by and make sure that you're safe. So the fire department comes in, they go downstairs, they leave. The next day, a fire truck pulls out in front of my place again, and the 5 firemen walk in, and they're like, "We need to reinspect something." And I'm like, "What do you need to reinspect?" "We need to reinspect the exit light downstairs." Which is where the rack and the cage and all that stuff was. And so they went downstairs and re-inspected my place, and then they left. It was really cool. But I passed the inspection, so. And my cafe lasted for 3 years, and lots of fun stories about that. And then it died. Lots of reasons. But the community had been started there. I mean, it had been started way before that, but it kept getting bubbling there, and we had more and more people like coming to events, and we had all this stuff. So my community actually got together and decided that they were going to do some. In fact, they tried to give me money and keep me going. They did that for a little while, but it didn't last. Out of that was the Center for Sex Positive Culture came. It would not have happened if it wasn't for my restaurant and for it being like dying. And I got approached by some amazing people, and they're like, "We'd like you to come in and help us start this." And I'm like, "I am so tired of volunteering for the community. I don't think I can do this anymore." And they're like, "No, we want to pay you." And I went, "Pay me for doing kinky stuff? What? Really?" And that's when we started, they got together and we started the Center for Sex Positive Culture. Now, a lot of you here are members or were members of the center. The center was a big thing. We ended up by the end of the decade, the 18 years when we were around, we had over 20,000 people had become members. I used to like to say we gave people permission to be the sexual beings they already were, and that's exactly what we did. We created events for every type of play imaginable. We had bondage parties. We had little parties. Littles, for those of you who don't know, are people that do age play. We had queer parties. We had we had all kinds of parties. But we did have some weird rules and some stuff. And one of the rules we had was no wandering wanking. That was our rule. No solo masturbatory play was not allowed, except for at our sex parties, but it was only allowed in a corner, in a kind of a special room. We kind of set up a porn room, but we really controlled solo masturbatory play. And one day I had and we controlled it partly because when I went on my honeymoon, I went to the Vault in New York City with Steve, and he put me in a cage, and I couldn't figure out whether there was glass around the cage, and that's what all of a sudden there's like 20 guys jacking off at me, and I'm like, don't shoot. You know, it was kind of scary, but there's a lot of quote-unquote wandering wanking or masturbation happening at the Vault, and it freaked me out. It freaked me out because I was new to all this. And so I demonized masturbation. I'm sad about this because that's one thing. I love to masturbate, but I demonized masturbation in public at the center until a really wonderful man comes up to me and he says, "How can you call yourself a sex-positive community center when my primary form of sex is not allowed except in a corner on a certain night?" And I went, "What?" He goes, "I can't have regular sex. I can only masturbate." And I went, "Oh, I'm going to fix that." I was just like, so we didn't change the rules for all of our parties because some of our parties, masturbation wasn't appropriate. I quit using the word wandering wanking. I'm only using it for tonight, but I don't use that word anymore. We created a party called the Myself Party, and the Myself Party celebrated masturbation. Anybody who showed up had to be comfortable with people masturbating everywhere, and it was fucking amazing. When it started, it was pretty much 80% men, 20% women. And it was one of our few parties that we gave couples a break-in so that we could have couples who were willing to be masturbated at have sex. So we changed our rules a lot. By the end of the center's most recent existence, and it's still kind of going on, which I'll talk about. By the end of it, guess what? We had about a 60-40 split. Lots of women were coming. It was a safe place to be a woman around men masturbating, or to masturbate around men. And we also opened up the masturbation at some of our other parties, the hump parties on Wednesday nights. We had a big, beautiful masturbation area. And it was only because somebody came up and told me and challenged me and told me that I had fucked up, because I had fucked up. And I learned from my fuck-ups as much as possible. So we fixed that.